Good afternoon. The next problem I'm going to work for you from the Math 04 exam review is problem number 10, which says solve the given equation in check, and that given equation has fractions in it. Just like number 1, the first thing we want to do when we can is get rid of our fractions and give ourselves an easier problem to solve. So if you remember from problem 1, in order to get rid of your denominators, you have to multiply through by the least common denominator. So I'm going to be looking for the least common denominator. But when I look at these three denominators, here I have a factor and here I have a factor, but here it's not in factored form. So the first thing I have to do to find that common denominator is factor it. So I'm going to factor out the GCF, which is x, and that leaves me x minus 2. So there's my factored form of that middle denominator. So now I have x here, x times x minus 2 here, and x minus 2 here. So my least common denominator then is x times the quantity x minus 2. And now if you remember back from problem 1, in order to get rid of those denominators, I multiply through by the common denominator. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply this whole equation. And of course, remember, that's not part of it. That's just where I factored it. Showed you my factoring. I'm multiplying through by the common denominator, which was x times x minus 2. You can think of that as over 1 if you want to, so that you can see you're multiplying a fraction by a fraction 3 times. So first I'm multiplying x times x minus 2 times 2 over x. So this denominator cancels with that x, and I'm left with 2 times x minus 2. Canceled out my like numerator and denominator. Plus, now I have x times x minus 2 in the denominator, and I have x times x minus 2 in my numerator. They all cancel out. X cancels with x minus 2 cancels with x minus 2, and that just leaves me plus 8. That looks a whole lot better, doesn't it? Okay, now when I multiply this denominator by this, or really I'm multiplying the whole thing, I'm canceling the denominators, multiplying this term by this term, this denominator cancels with that numerator or whole number, depending on how you want to look at it. That leaves me x to multiply by 5. That gives me 5x. Now, on the left-hand side, I still have parentheses, so while this problem looks way easier, my next step is to distribute my 2. That gives me 2x, and 2 times negative 2 is minus 4, plus 8 equals 5x. Okay, left-hand side, I still have like terms to combine. Negative 4 and positive 8 makes plus 4. So I have 2x plus 4 equals 5x. Okay, now normally I move over to the left, but since if I move to the right this time I end up with a positive variable, I'm going to move this direction. So I'm subtracting 2x from 5x because my next step was to get my x alone, have my variable separated from most of my other stuff. I have 3x equals 4, and now I have 3 multiplied by x, so I want to divide, and that gives me x equals 4 over 3. I like to see my variable on the left. So x is equal to 4 over 3. And I'll bet somebody listening to this has said, uh-oh, Miss Nystrom left something important out at the very first step. And I did. I'm wondering if any of you are recognizing what I did not do that I should have done at the very top. Once I knew what my LCD was, that LCD has variables in it, and that LCD came from my denominators. And there's something we're not allowed to have in the denominator of a fraction. I'm hoping that all of you remember that you can't have 0 in the denominator of a fraction. And so when you have a variable in your denominator, you have to name your excluded values, or your things that x, or whatever your variable is, cannot be. I hope you're getting used to my handwriting. My excluded values are any values that would make my denominator have a 0 in it. Well, certainly if I have an x, that's going to give me x equals 0. And for x minus 2, I solve that set equal to 0, and I get x equals 2. That means once I find my answer, if that answer is either 0 or 2, I can't use it as an answer, because when I plug it back in to my original equation, I would get 0 in the denominator. I didn't get one of those, so that should check. I'm not going in to check it. I'm out of whiteboard space here. But if you go back in and plug that into your x's, the answer should work for you just fine. So that's it.